So this thing is automatically updated. This is always the first thing that is updated. But if you look here, see how these cut lines are right here. You come down here and hit sonar chart. And as you can see, a lot of that stuff's actually there. And the reason for that is that stuff is stored on the sonar chart layer. That way you have to have such a high percentage on the overall layer that is actual NOAA or US Coast Guard approved mapping. So if you put that stuff on a separate layer, you can actually show a lot more updates that way without it having to be, go through all the red tape, I guess I should say. But you can see a lot of those contours are there, all the drops. You can see it on this end. It's a pretty steep drop. Again, I'll turn that off. Forgive me, guys. My Wi-Fi's running a little slow too. So you can see there's just cut lines where there's just mapping that's just not there. But basically with the sonar chart program, for anyone that's not familiar with it, it's basically where users are recording data as they fish, uploading it, and it's coming back in 1 foot contours. The more people that do this, especially on a lake like Toledo Bend, as you can see, there's tons of flooded timber. It's tough to get those big sonar boats inside one of the, some of that timber, whereas, a bass boat is a little easier, to get in, to maneuver between those. So, turn it back on, and you can see that all the contour lines are actually there. Another couple good areas to show that on is on the south end. You come down, this is what's known as Sandy Creek Flats. So you can see there's huge areas that are and it's, again, perfect cut lines to where that mapping has just been taken. You turn that on, and all that flat out there is all mapped off, then turning it back on. You can see it just makes a huge difference out around this hump, islands, and all this out here. And there's several areas on the lake that are like that. Like I said, Toledo Bend's a perfect example. There's a lot of that lake that has, if you don't know to turn that layer on, like this is leaving, here's the boat lane coming out of 6 Mile. All that flats, there's a lot more mapping to the flats out there than what a lot of people think, because not knowing to turn that on. All right, let's kind of start getting off into actually looking at the frog, and we'll start out, say, in the early, pre-spawn. Really in the south, anytime the water, say, over, I'm real comfortable anytime it's over 54, 55 degrees, I'll start throwing a frog. Now, granted, you have to fish the conditions where that really slow the frog down, make long casts, and it's one of those things. A lot of times, you're looking around, fishing it real slow. Maybe you're looking for bed fish, and you'll hear those fish just come up and slurp it. It is a very slow, but I've caught more 7 and 8 pound fish that time of year than probably any other time of the year, because it's easy. Those big females are moving up. Where they're going to be staging at. It's just a matter of fishing it slow enough, or, if the water's warming enough for those fish to come up and eat that frog. Again, this is some areas on the south end of Toledo Bend. I'll use those just as it's such a diverse, body of water. So that during pre-spawn, those fish are moving up, getting ready to spawn. They may have, I see you've got a main ditch right here. So those fish are moving up, and they're staging as they're getting ready. So January, those fish are hanging out on these steep breaks, slowly working their way in. Those warmer days, they move a little quicker than others. They may stop on these points, but then once you say into February, you start looking at, you're throwing that frog. What I like to do is I'll come into these pockets that those fish move into spawn, and I'll stop. Now, if anyone can see my mouse, but I'll stop, say out towards the mouth of it, where I can barely reach the back of it. I'll power pull down and make super long cast, and slowly walk that frog back. Like I said, you may be one of those deals you only catch 5-6 fish a day doing it, but the chances are it's a really big fish. My favorite type of frog, I guess, I basically have two that I use a lot, and it's a Spro, either the Poppin or the 65. Sometimes the junior, but most of the time it's the Popper or the 65. This time of year, I like to do the Popper more than any other, because it's like it's an open. Most of the time, when you're throwing it that early in the year, it's going to be an open water deal. So you're you want something making a little bit of a commotion as you as you're slowly working it. You can kind of pop that thing almost like a pop R, or even walk it real slow. And we'll look at some pictures in a little while, or when I do the video of how I trim the frog. So, which they're getting a little better. I noticed some of the newer frogs from Spro, they're actually starting to trim those legs a little bit. What I like to do is basically I'll come back the same length as the body, maybe a little shorter, and I'll trim one side about a 1/2 inch shorter than the other. That allows that frog to walk a little harder, and it's a little easier on you trying to walk that frog when one side's a little bit heavier than the other, and it tends to make it twist. And kind of your goal that time of year, what you're wanting to do is to move that frog as much as possible side to side, but not back to you. So you're going to have a lot of slack in your line, but it's also one of those things, since you're going to have that slack in your line, the importance of having the right gear ratio reels, the right rod, the right line, and to really be paying attention to what's going on there, because it's real easy, if they're finicky, for them to suck it down and you not be paying attention, and by the time you set the hook, it's too late, or the fish is done turned into a way you can't get a good hook set on that. And what I like to use 90% of my frog fishing is a Lew's 7.3 custom light frog rod. It's got the wind grip handle on it, and we'll look at that here in a second. I use an 8:3-to-1 gear ratio Lew's reel and 60-pound Sunline FX2 braid. Again, I'll show everyone that setup. I normally always carry a minimum of 3 frog rods in the boat, just rigged up for different presentations. Like I said, that time of year, I really like throwing that Spro popping frog, but then there's other days that the River to Sea Bullywah 65, it's a lot wider profile bait. So, there's times that bigger profile is what they're wanting that time of year, because, they're not eating as much. When they do a bigger meal, they put out the effort. They want that, a quick fill up, I guess you'd say, on it. And that's, any of those type pockets you can find, like we looked at just a minute ago, that have some kind of scattered vegetation, the better, because that vegetation, obviously, it holds heat. So those fish are going to move up, hang out in that heat, warming up, and feeding on stuff, getting ready to spawn. I like to look at a lot of stuff, not saying that you can. I know there's fish all over these lakes. I like staying stuff more main lake. Obviously, that's protected from a north wind. That's a big deal. That water's going to warm up that much faster. But I feel like there's more fish that's going to move up off of those flats and anything really close to deep water. And that's not just in the pre-spawn. It's also a big deal to me when I'm fishing the frog in say, summertime in thick pads. You're going to want those pads that are closest to the deepest water. You're not going to catch them as good in, I'd say, pads that are choked out by hydrilla or by other, vegetation. At least down, where I'm used to throwing a frog at, and it's, in the southern part of the United States, mostly Texas, that, that's just where your bigger fish are going to be. They're going to be close to deep water. That way, they can move up and down pretty easily without a whole lot of effort in the summertime. Now, really going on from pre-spawn, going into the spawn, that's where I'll get into throwing more of a white color frog. Because those fish will eat a frog off a bed. If you can throw it way ahead, or there's times even a frog, I'll use it as a search bait for beds. I'm looking, I'm sight fishing, I'm cruising, I'm throwing a frog way ahead of the boat as I'm looking for beds. And as I'm looking, that makes me fish that frog super, super slow. And sometimes the fish won't eat it, but they'll come up and roll on it and basically show themselves to where you can ease up and actually helps locate that fish on a bed. So, you'll know about it way before you get to it, if that makes sense. So it's not only just it's a great, great search bait, in my opinion, that time of year. As you move a little on and say into the shad spawn, I'll start, to where you're throwing that frog a lot faster. Those fish are feeding, especially first thing in the morning. And that's where some of your more, the shad spawn type deal, you kind of have a couple deals going on there. So you have the shad spawn going on. So throwing a white, frog, and, they're going to be spawning on hard substances. So that's actually even a time you can catch them pretty decent on a frog on riprap. Because, those fish are going to be spawning on that. The shad are spawning on riprap, and any kind of hard, bank, clay banks, things like that. That's actually a time of year you can catch a frog throwing it catch them on a frog throwing it like a spook or anything like that. And also, here we have a lot of I call hay grass. It always grows in, where there's a lot of sand. So those hard bottoms like that is where those shad are going to spawn. That's even when things like throwing a ribbit or a horny toad, those type, a buzzing type swimming frog play. That's really the bulk of the time that I throw one. Is going to be your, April, May, early part of June, to cover a lot of water, especially first thing in the morning. It's, because they're up in that grass, so you can get that frog in there, that swimming frog, in places that maybe you can't throw a buzz bait. And then as you start transitioning into end of May, 1st of June, you start running into, in the south, a brim spawn. The perch are everywhere up shallow, and those fish have just got through spawning, and they're absolutely crushing the brim. And the brim beds are super easy. You can basically just cruise around, trolling motor on high, looking for them, almost like you would bedfish, because they're going to be in the same type areas, hard bottom, and you'll see it look like craters, though those brim will be everywhere. And even if you can't see the largemouth, they're hanging around somewhere close. So it's, I've even fished tournaments 2 years ago in Rayburn. I was throwing the live target sun perch, and basically you could make 2 or 3 pockets and keep making the same pass over and over again, because you catch one fish off a brim bed, leave it, and another fish will replace it. They were just gorging themselves on those perch as they're up there trying to spawn. So, there's, which we call it frog fishing, but there's tons of different baits to throw like a frog. You've got that, like we've talked about, the scroll popping frog, the river to sea 65. They make a popping frog. It's a bullywah is what they call it. I don't care for it as much. I think the mouth's a little too big on it. If I'm doing a popper, I'm typically into a spro. And then you just get into your swimming frogs, and then you've also got your baits, your perch imitation baits, like the live target bait, which we'll look at in a second. As you start looking into, say, as you get it where we're talking shad spawn stuff, that's when you're going to start looking at some of these same areas. They're still going to use these drains to travel, but you're going to have, on these points. So whereas they may not be in the back, but these, if you got some hard points out front of it, that's where those shad are going to try to spawn at. As you can see, like this point here, they're going to, they'll congregate on there, and then it's just, you could have a field day the first 30, 45 minutes of daylight, during that shad spawn. Once you start getting into, and we'll kind of go looking over here into housing, it's notorious that there's always tons of pads towards the back of this thing. It'll be solid, just lily pads everywhere. And you always know it's a good time to throw a frog when you pull up to those pads and you can hear that popping noise, which what that is it's brim underneath that pop in the bottom of those pads. And those big largemouth love eating those, in the summertime. It's an easy meal for them, so they'll be up underneath it. But it always seems like, those pads that are closer to deep water. So like you can see this island right here. There's a sharp drop all the way around it. Normally all around the back side of this, as you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but it's solid pads up here. Well, the most productive sides are these real steep drops that are right there next to it, whereas once you start getting back into some of these pockets where you can see it's super flat, it's like the water gets a little stagnant. You just don't, you don't get those quality bites. Same deal back here. You've got all these just sharp breaks. And, that's when, even though it's solid pads back there and you're visually looking at your target, it's still a good time to try to use your mapping, because of the fact of you can see which pads are closest to deep water. Pretty much anytime you're fishing vegetation, I think that's a very important deal, close to deep water, especially, once it's not as big a factor, say, you want those flat pockets in the spring when those fish are spawning. But as the water starts warming up, you're going to want to pay a lot of attention to those steep contours that are either close to the grass that you're fishing, or they're close to your lily pads, that sort of thing. And you have to do it. We'll talk a little about going in the summertime, night fishing. That is, I typically fish a lot deep at night, a lot of ridges, points, stuff like that. But I have caught a lot of fish as well fishing a frog. Now, at night, I like to throw the big Stanley bull ribbit, the little bit oversized one, or a popping frog, both in black. But if I'm throwing like a spro popping frog, I don't stop it. Like you want something, those fish, it's nighttime, you want it to be able to track that bait. So you can just steady pop it. And if you can find those areas that those fish can move up and down super easy, I can actually show you a good location. I've actually caught them really well on Toledo at night is this point right here. So as you can see, this point falls off into 30 some odd feet of water on one side of it, but 20, 30 yards up, they're in the dirt. It's solid grass up there. So that's one of those things. You can keep your boat out in 30 foot of water, make a long cast. And I've caught a ton of fish on that same type of scenarios on both Rayburn, Toledo, and all other lakes I've traveled to. But as far as at night, fishing, different aquatic vegetation with my boat sitting in deep water and fishing shallow, being close to deep water being the key. As you start getting into fall, you'll have, again, I still am looking at stuff like, your pepper grass, your pads. Your pads will start dying off. You'll start getting that kind of a brown color. And some people try to steer away from them thinking that they're dead. Their kids, pulling oxygen out of the water. But I have caught tons of fish in the fall, because there's tons of big red. That's about the time of the year the big red ear brims start moving up on our southern lakes. So you can actually use the same deal. You'll pull up, you can hear them popping, cover water with that frog. And I'll go from whereas we were talking shad spawn, white in a night fishing, I go with the black. When you start getting in that, I go with the darker colors. As you get, like, say, from end of September or first of, October, I say really mid-October on, I'll start getting into stuff like from Spro, the natural red color or the red ear color. That's when they really kind of start like the maroon colors, because those sunfish, those red ears that time of year have a real dark maroon, orangish, bronze tint to them. So you basically, it's a frog, but you need to use it to try to match the hatch. I know that sounds cliche. You hear that a ton, but I strongly recommend that. Like springtime, I stick with greens. That's when, you first start hearing some of those frogs coming out. You hear the croaking. As you work into the shad spawn, you're in the whites, that kind of. And I'm also a firm believer. I try to keep it very simple. So I stick to about 4, maybe 5 colors on a frog. I know there's hundreds of colors out there of different variations. I stick with very few colors. I stick with a white, not really concerned, either the tropical white or like the sexy shad type color. The natural green is the only green color I throw. Obviously a solid black for that dirty water, nighttime or cloudy when it's real cloudy outside. And, either like a red ear or a natural red type color, or basically, 95% of the time it's going to be one of those color frogs I've got tied on. And when you start looking into, say a swimming frog, same deal. I use a lot of watermelon red pearl. It's got that pearl belly. So anytime I'm throwing it, I'm trying to imitate some kind of shad or bait fish. So, unless it's nighttime, most of the time that's the colors I throw. Looking in here, so this is a pretty cool website. I know a lot of you know Tackle Warehouse. This is Tackle Attic. They've actually got a couple stores here locally, but they actually have a huge online store. Here in Texas, it's basically free. You pay for the 2-day shipping, you have it next day most of the time. You can see here's the spit and wah, and so here's the bully wah. I'll show you some of the colors I kind of like to use on it. Like I said, I'm a big fan of just keeping it simple. A bluegill color, a green color. That's the bulk of, the fishing I like to do with those. I like them. They're a very flat frog, and they have huge hooks on them. You don't lose many fish. They're super durable. I like the fact if you look at this, they use like a braid to tie around your eye, so it helps on that frog ripping and taking on water. So I should go back and look at the so it was. While that's loading, let's actually look. Let me give me just 1 second, guys. I'm gonna shoot over and try to get the video part started. Just give me just 1 second while I get that set up. Guys, real quick, can any of you see the video yet? So I got a no from Chris and a yes from Eddie. No, okay. Let's see. All right, let's see what we got here. Let me stop sharing. All right, so we can see it now. Okay, cool. Like I said, I'll come back and answer some of the questions in a minute. First, I'll show you kind of some of what I use as far as the exact setups on rod and reels. I typically have 3 of the exact same rod and reel that I use most of my frog fishing applications, but I do end up, I actually have a couple other if I'm throwing the junior, or say if I'm skipping the frog underneath cypress trees like we did here on the Sabine River here recently. Let me grab those real quick. So this rod here is actually my #1 frog rod. I use it more than, so I carry 3 of these at all times. They're very dependable, strong rod. I mean, you can boat flip 5, 6, 7 pound fish with it. It's actually called, it's a Lew's custom speed stick light. So if you can see that, it's got the wing grip handles on it. It's called the Magnum pitching stick. On it, I've got the Tournament, sorry, the Tournament Pro G. And like I said, I use a, let's see, is it 8-3 to 1 reel, 60 pound. Get a little closer. 60 pound braid. That's FX2 braid. And this is actually a frog I was just using on the Sabine River. Like I said, it's pretty dirty water, so I stuck the black on everything I was doing. This is the Navy Seal. Like I said, I don't care about really the top color as much. The black is just a black and blue type color. Dirty river water. Thing I like about this rod, you can't really tell, sit down, is it's got so the bend on it, it's got a ton of backbone, but about the first 3 eyes, you can skip that frog really well. So you can see it's got a little bit of play at the end, but as far as forcing those fish kind of pads and matted grass, never had an issue with it. But it's also not just a broom handle either. Like I said, I carry 3 of these rods at all times with the exact same reel. Because I don't want to be, say if I'm going down, I'm skipping underneath cypress trees or something. I don't want to, hey, I want to try another color, and I pick up another reel. It's a little different reel. It makes me set a little differently, and then I'm backlashing, or I'm missing that cast by 8 to 10 inches. And when you're throwing in small holes underneath cypress trees, which the kind of the deal on the Sabine River was here recently was that way. So you come up, the water was up, so I mean you had small windows to skip underneath those overhanging, either cypress or willow trees, and that's where those fish were at. So missing it by 6 inches, you might hit a limb, and you spook that fish instead of throwing it underneath there. So you don't want to have to get used to another reel every time you pick up a different. So in my opinion, if you're going to have multiple frog rods, I think it's important to have the same reel. You see, this is another one of them. We were talking earlier. This is the exact same rod. I've got that live target perch on it. When those when those brim are up there doing their thing spawning, they will absolutely choke this thing. And it's almost like a swim bait bite when they hit it because they absolutely crush it. So on the Sabine River, I was actually catching a lot of fish on the junior, the smaller version, solid black. When I started throwing it, I wanted a rod that was had a decent amount of tip to it. So I actually went to the 7-foot, same style. It's a custom speed stick light from Lew's, the Magnum bass rod. It's a 7-foot medium heavy, but with a fast action. The rod's actually good up to 7/8 of an ounce. And this allowed me to go with that extra light frog. As you can see, actually I cut the legs off on it a lot more than I normally do because I wanted a compact. There's a ton of those 12 to 15-inch fish on the Sabine River. So when I picked this one up, I was doing more for, hey, I'm trying to get my limit. I wanted every fish that's underneath there I want to bite. So I downsized them into a smaller bait. So again, like I said, exact same reel. It's the Tournament Pro G from Lew's. Super stiff drag, super stout drag. I keep it locked. Anytime I'm throwing a frog, I keep the drag locked all the way down. Because when I set the hook, if that fish is in pads or matted hydrilla or pepper grass or hay grass, you don't want that fish to get any slack at all. Because the first thing you need to do, you want the fish to eat it, but when you set the hook, you need to get that fish's head turned. And you need to get it coming to you. Once you do that, that's when it's a huge deal having a high-speed reel. Because once you get their head up and that fish coming to you, you just need to crank and keep that fish its momentum coming to you. And that's actually what makes it easier to swing some of your bigger fish. If you get that momentum coming to them, it's not as much torque in the rod as if that fish is trying to dive. What you don't want to happen is you bring that fish to the boat, it gets to the boat, and you start letting it dive down, or you start you try to swing it as the fish is going away from you, and sometimes you'll rip those hooks right out of that fish's mouth. Now, when I do go to a slightly different rod, because I want a little bit more tip to it, not much, but it's a little different. So this is when I'm throwing a horny toad or a rivet. I tend to throw, basically my rule of thumb is if it's dead, calm, slick, I'm throwing a horny toad. I think a little bit more subtle of it coming through the water is a big deal. If there's any kind of ripple at all, I'm throwing either like a horny toad, a Stanley rivet, or I'm throwing a Gambler king toad. As you can see with it, and I'll show you some of the stuff in this box in a minute, but it's the Gambler king toad. It's a short compact bait. I don't know if you can see that, but it's actually got ribs on it. And then it's coming through like this. So the resistance of it in the water, it actually makes a lot more commotion than you would think. Kind of just show you, I know there's a lot of different ways to rig these things. A way that I have found that has worked really well for me, I used to use nothing but the screw lock hooks, and they worked great, but you tear a lot of frogs up because anytime that fish, you set the hook comes out of the frog, and you just got the corkscrew thing there, the pin lock on the front of it, holding it, you lose a lot of frogs, or it may come out of it and stay on the hook, and you rip the whole nose apart on it. Well, something I've started doing and had really good luck with it is basically I take a 1/16 ounce, just bullet, screw in weight. If you guys can see that. It's a really small weight. Screw in. And I actually use just a plain EWG Gamakatsu offset hook. You can see it. Nothing, just a typical worm hook. And what I do is I'll come in here, thread that on, and run it just a little bit of further down. What it does, though, is by me coming a little bit further down with it, it allows, even on just a 4/0 hook, it allows me to come in here and hook it right between that frog's legs. So you can see, you can take and hook it and bury the point right in that frog like that. So it's super weedless, but that point is right under the skin there. And then you come back in and take and screw that. So that does multiple things like that. One, it makes it even more weedless because you don't have that blunt nose on the end, so that thing crawls through grass like crazy now. If you come to a hole in the grass or you've thrown in, a fish blew up, you threw back out there, you can actually be coming to the hole, kill it, and it'll dive nose down just like that into that hole. What I've really had noticed that it does a lot is you'll catch a fish, and this bait tends to take with the sinker in it and run up the line. So now, no more tearing the nose up on the frog. All you have to do is slide your hook back in, hook it right back up. That little bit of weight too makes a huge difference on castability. Which, in my opinion, the horny toad casts really well anyway. It's pretty thick plastic. It's real kind of a compact. The ribbit, the legs kick a little more. So that little bit of weight makes all the difference in the world. Again, Lew's custom speed stick. This is a 7.2 heavy with a fast tip. This is what they call their Magnum grass rod. This is not a rod. I use this rod also for different things, like throwing a big worm or something in brush piles. Throwing a football jig. So I actually have one of the newer reels from Lew's, the Team Lew's Custom Pro. It's actually got the matching wing grip handles on it. Very sweet reel. The only reason I haven't switched over yet on my other frog is my actual big frog rod. I think that reel on 60-pound braid holds somewhere around 115 yards, or I may be a little off on that. Either way, it holds about 10 more yards more. So when I put in that backing on it, the braid's going to last longer, that extra 10 yards. And having that full spool to where, like say in the springtime, where I think it's a huge deal to make those really long casts, having that a little bit extra, that more full spool, a little bit extra line gives you that extra 5 yards, maybe all the difference in the world on catching 7 or 8 pound fish that's getting ready to spawn. I actually forgot to get my I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but it's actually a really cool bag from Sims. It's actually a real bag is what it's made for. It's got it's not super hard, but it's a hard, durable top on it. And it's actually made to hold reels. But it works wonderful as a line bag. So you got that. So you can keep these bulk spools. They fit right down in the holes. The braid bulk spools, you can put 2 in it. And then the flat braid spools, there's this little bill up here that I can take, and it's got zipper pockets on it. So I keep some flat spools up here, screwdriver, if I'm trying to put it on by myself, or if I don't have some kind of line spooling station. Like I said, that bag is from Sims. Very sweet for carrying the line. So this is the braid that I use. FX2 frogging and flipping, 60-pound. I like to use the dark green, just a personal preference. This braid seems like I've always used Power Pro. That was always and I still think Power Pro is a wonderful line. But this braid seems like it holds its color just a little bit longer. I can go months now on the same reel that it's not turning white. It's more of a round braid, so it doesn't dig in quite as bad. I don't have the wind knots near as bad. So that's just kind of something I like to do. Going into my frogs, it may be tough to do on here. Here's my swimming frogs. I keep it pretty simple. As far as the swimming frogs that I have, my whites, blacks, mostly all of them are this, the watermelon red with a pearl belly. Here's the bull ribbits in the same color. Small ribbits for when I was on the river. That's, basically keep it pretty simple with that. Something I do carry a ton of is floating frogs. At any given time, I'll have, and you can't see my pegboard, but I've probably got 100 spro frogs and river sea frogs hanging up over there. It's a bait I use a lot, so I keep a lot in stock. As you can see, I use these, these thick boxes. I think it's like the 3700s or something. And I keep them in their packages because it seems like you don't have to worry about anything sticking to them or anything. And then the ones I'm just using, I'll keep down here in the bottom. Like I said, There's the red ear color, and I even, take a marker if I think it's too bright, I'll color it in. Here's the natural red color I was talking about. I use a lot in the fall. The tropical white is typically my go-to white color, just because I like the fact that it's basically just white and gray on the bottom. Which is I don't really throw this is the King Daddy. They're really, really big frog. That's the color that I like to throw. The natural is the green, but typically it's just a white and yellow bottom, just basically just like a frog. So, but I'll have this box. This is my River Sea frog box, and this is just basically a dollar store container that has the locking deal on it. So there's their popping frog. It's actually, as you can tell, has a super, super wide profile frog. Let's see one you can. This one work. So if you look, what's cool about the River Sea frog, it's actually got a rubber stopper that's around the hooks, kind of like a shrink wrap, that they put on the hooks, and it goes a good ways up in the frog. So what that does is actually help seal off that hole, so you don't get near the water in there. And you can see, like on there, they don't do it on that one, but like on their typical frogs, you can see this thing here's got a little bit of a few miles on it. This is a color I like to throw late summer. As you can see, comparing it to a Spro, it's just a lot wider profile bait. It's a fatter type frog. What I like it for is here, the peppergrass mats up. So you can see it's not quite as thick, and it collapses actually a lot easier. As you can see the difference between those things. The hooks on this one are actually, to the top of the frog, where this one, that's why it's a little bit thicker material, whereas this one just collapses so easy. You can hear the air coming out of this one where that hole in the bottom, whereas this one is just. But as I was saying, as you look on the nose of it, if you guys could see that or not, it's actually, it looks like braid, but they've actually sewn a piece around where it goes up to the eye. So it's super tight, so that frog doesn't slide back. You don't get water, and they overlap it a good bit. So as you can see, there's probably an eighth of an inch there that they have tied up to where you just don't get the water in these frogs like you do in a lot of others. Let me think. Is that everything? Oh, wow, it's already 8:15. Tell you what, let's jump on and take a few questions. I'll go to the Q&A, and then I'll check the chat, see what everybody's. So Mario, what do you think of the new sprinkler frog craze? I think it's a great idea. I think they're hot. They're basically the Whopper Plopper right now. The Whopper Plopper is kind of doing the same thing. I don't know. I think the castability is a huge deal. You're throwing it. I don't see it being a ton of different commotion than, say, a ribbit or the top toad, except the fact it's a lot more durable. You're going to catch a ton of fish on one bait. It's basically a weedless Whopper Plopper is kind of what they've made, and it's like I said, I think it's a great idea. It catches a ton of fish. Now, one thing I will say is I have seen a lot of guys who are building their own, which is pretty cool. Basically taking a frog and either putting a swivel on it, taking the legs off, and either having a swim bait tail on a screw lock, or even I've seen guys, which I don't know if it was one that was already broke. I've seen guys who have actually taken the back half of a Whopper Plopper and attached the back of those things, which the only way to really do that is to tear apart a $13 bait to do it. So, that's kind of tough. But I think it's a really cool bait. I think once it, settles down, I think there's going to be a ton more spinoffs on it. Joe Armstrong, what is the best way to fish a live target? I fish from a Hobie kayak and not being able to be sand challenge for me. So setting low in the water, I would say if you'll keep a little more, so like that live target bait walks like crazy back and forth. If you can keep a little more slack, which I know that's kind of, you don't typically hear that, but keep a little more slack in your line if you have to pop your rod up. As long as that slack's there, that you can make that bait walk, just pay a little more attention. Again, that's where that high-speed reel is going to come into play, because of the fact that if you're keeping the slack in your mind, you're going to want the ability to take up a lot of line in just a few reel cranks without losing the fish. So, you can pull it to the side. Either way, what you need to do is be able to keep slack so that you can – that's the biggest deal. Even when you're standing up doing it, a lot of slack allows that bait to walk back and forth without coming to you much. And that bait there would be pretty crazy. Once you get the rhythm down on it, that bait will walk back and forth probably, 12, 16 inches before it starts moving to you. So I think the biggest deal there is slack. But making sure you have a good reel that you can catch up to it. You don't want to be doing it with a six-something gear ratio reel, I don't think. And you don't want to be doing it with anything under, in my opinion, anything under 7.2 as far as rod. You want something when you set the hook and you start reeling, you take up a lot of line to get that fish moving to you. Chris Flutie, anything you can do to keep the water from getting into a spro frog? Seems like every frog, every 3 or 4 casts, you have to drain them. There's a few tricks to here and there. I honestly like the idea with like they do, like I was showing you with the River to Sea. That's literally just shrink wrap. So you can take it, which it's electrical. All it is electrical heat shrink. So you can put that around it, and the way that stuff works is you put it around the hook, light it, and it sucks it to the hook. And then when you put it through that hole, it kind of helps seal it off, just like they're doing with that. And that's all that is. You can see that little piece is hollow, like there's a hole in it. But all that is they took that hook. See if I can get that hook out while I'm tearing it up. And it's just shrink wrap around it. So that's actually a good deal. I've seen people try the putting like foam earplugs from, a job site on it, crinkle them up and then get it in there. The only thing that scares me about those is if the earplug gets too stiff or, it won't let the frog collapse like it needs to get a good hook set, or if they get waterlogged inside, it's going to make that frog heavy. So after they eat the frog, anonymous viewer, after they eat the frog, how long do you wait to set the hook? I like to reel down to the fish, and unless I just see it, if it's close enough, I see it and I see the frog go sideways, then I'll set the hook on it. But I actually like, as I'm moving, I keep reeling until I feel tension, and then I set the hook. Is like what I like to do. But it's pretty cool. So next time you go out and they're really eating the frog, if you actually let one eat it and not set the hook at all, if you're just fun fishing, look at how long that fish typically will eat a frog. I've played around with them, and to where they'll come up and eat it, and you can slowly reel it and almost get that fish to the boat because they'll hold it for forever. They think it's a real frog, so they're actually trying to suck it down. Really, so if you can wait, you can count to 2 seconds. It's hard to say just on every fish. It's kind of that's why I like when one eats it to kind of reel. Unless it catches me off guard, like I said, I just see the frog completely disappear. They'll choke on it. They're not much on, unless they're just not eating it well, they're getting on the outside of their mouth. Most time they eat it, they're not letting it float back up in a couple of seconds. So it's Mark kind of asked the same question as an anonymous viewer. Kevin Shires asked, who makes the screw-in weight for the horny toad? That's actually just an old school, just bullet weight. I know that they used to be, Gambler used to make a lot of screw-in weights. So you can check either one of those. Mike and Morty, you ever dip the legs to change their enhance the color? I can honestly say I have never changed the color on the legs. I'm more concerned with the color of the body because I feel like that's what they see most. I already trimmed the legs a good bit. And I feel like that bigger profile is what they're seeing. I'm not saying it wouldn't work or wouldn't be. Like during when brim are up there shallow, dipping, the very tip chartreuse, kind of like the edges of their fins are, it, very well could work. But no, I've never actually tried it. Bragg Bass asked, during pre-spawn, would you use a frog to search an area for pre-spawn or spawning fish? Yes, without a doubt. That's one of my favorite ways to target pre-spawn. I'm probably one of the first guys that, that water starts creeping into the 50s, and I know I have to catch it, slow, but I've caught a ton of big fish doing that. And it's, February, early March. Like I said, the biggest thing is if you think you're fishing it slow enough, slow down. and a lot of those spawning fish will definitely show themselves. But yeah, it's a great way to catch big fish that time of year. Steve asked, Chile being early November, your favorite bays? I'm a kayaker. I really liked where, so you start getting into stuff to where everything is padded over, shallow. So but it's starting to die off. So a lot of those fish are moving up. So like south ends of the lake, I like to say you could put in there at Pleasure Point and fish the back of Mill Creek. There's a ton of good pads back there. A lot of deep drains, a lot of close to deep water. If you're more mid-lake, anything in the back of Howson Bay is phenomenal that time of year, either straight across from Fin and Feather or just all the way back to the creek. That's all solid pads back there. If you're a little more further north, you have the 1215 area where the road kind of dead ends into the lake. All of that would be solid pads. On all those islands, you could fish for days back there with a kayak and never hit open water. Bragg Bass said you add a rattle to your frog. The times I like to add a rattle, if I'm fishing, say, just solid mats, to where I like the extra weight and the extra noise, because the fish aren't really seeing the bait. They're just seeing the silhouette or the weight of it pushing down. Yes, I like to throw a rattle in it. What conditions other than below 58 degrees would you not throw a frog? Where it really gets tough throwing a frog in colder water like that is if it gets crystal clear skies and clear water, no ripple. Real clear water, I think you have to have some kind of wind or clouds or something to break it up. Now, there's been times I've had a front come in, hey, it's mid-February. I caught them decent in practice. A front comes in that night. They may not start eating that frog till after, like, say, 1 o'clock, and then you can find some little areas of, like, with me, that time of year, I'm looking for pepper grass in the edges of creeks. So, those fish can ease up there to sun. Well, if that cold front comes in, they're going to hunker down till noon. So you may, after 1 o'clock, slip up there and try to catch some of those fish. Let's go over to chat. Okay, Charlie actually just answered that. Eddie Dillo, do you throw the frog a lot on Raven in February, or where do you target? That's when, yes, I do throw a lot in February, and that's kind of where I'm starting to look at, maybe some of those fish you moved up a little early, or, on the sides of the pockets as they're moving in. I know a trap is big time on Raven that time of year. So if you're going up a drain, throwing a trap, it never hurts to pick one up and bomb it down the very back of that thing. To see any of those fish that, if it's a warm day, they've moved up. It's a great search bait. And like I said, you may not get many bites, but it's one of those deals. If you're burning a trap or throwing a chatterbait or a swim bait, that time of year, what's big there, and it's a warmer day or it's been warmer, so the water's pretty warm. Pick that frog up and bomb it down some of the middle of those spawning pockets. And you may be surprised. Like I said, it may be something you only get a couple bites on a day. There's been days that I've been smashing them on a trap all day, and then 1 o'clock, the sun's been out, even though it's cold, because you got to think of that water kind of like your windshield on your truck. Is even though it's cold outside, when you get in on a sunny day, it might be 40 degrees outside, but if that sun's shining through your windshield, it's basically a magnifier, so it's warming it up. So right under some of that grass, it's warmer than than what you're showing in your surface temperature. So it's one of those things. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right before you weigh in at 3 or something, you pick one up, and anywhere there's a channel swing or there may be some grass up there, that's kind of what you're going to want to look at. All right, guys, I think I've kind of answered everything from chat and from the Q&A. Anyone else have any other questions or? Charles asked, when do you put the frog down completely? That is the $1 million question. That's been one of those things that has absolutely bit me in the past. I put too much confidence into it. Obviously, a telltale sign is I say a front comes in, it gets bluebird skies, and you're not fishing some kind of matted vegetation, then yeah, you might as well put it down, because if you're not getting any kind of, with me, I use it as if I throw it for an hour, 2 hours, and don't get a bite, yeah, then I'm going to start looking at doing something else and just kind of working it in throughout the day to see if they turn on to it. But if you're hitting some of your main productive areas where you've been catching fish and it's tough, those fish didn't leave, so you probably just need to change your presentation up. that's kind of, or if like you've been just catching them great and it's been, you know, hey, they're underneath matted vegetation and it's been bright and bluebird skies. That's how you're catching them, especially in the fall. And then all of a sudden it gets real cloudy and windy. Well, what that'll do a lot of times, those fish that were under those mats, it'll spread them out. So that's when, either a ribbit or some other type of bait you're covering a lot of water with may be better, because those fish aren't. And that's why, honestly, like a pad bite, I won't go to a pad bite till 9 o'clock, because most of the time, yeah, there's times you can catch them early morning, and that is the case every once in a while. But there's times that sun positions those fish. Once that sun gets up, they go to shade. So they roam and eat that morning. You may be throwing a spook on the outside edge of it. Once the sun gets up good, they'll push under. You can pat them a little better. Mark McGlade asked if you go small in tidal water. Yes and no. So it depends on what I'm doing. Perfect example is, the Sabine River. There's a ton of fish on it. Bassmaster Open. Even going smaller, you could still catch big fish. Everyone knows that. But if I'm just trying to get 1 or 2 bites, then I'm going to stick with a full-size frog. For instance, I was throwing a whopper plopper. That's how I was catching my fish. If for some reason the whopper plopper would have burned out and I'm just trying to catch a limit, I'm definitely going small so I can get my limit, and then I start trying to upgrade. I had a really good day 1 here. I was in 12th place after day 1. Day 2, I basically knew I didn't care about a limit. So there's only one way you're going to win is catch 5 big fish. But say day 1, if it's one of those deals you pull out there, boom, you catch a 4-pounder. Hey, you've got a decent bag going, but you need 1 more fish. Yeah, you may downsize to do that. But yeah, it's kind of you can. It's that kind of a trial and error, because you can catch 10-inch fish on the big spro frog. So a lot is the body of water, knowing what they eat the most. Or there's times if they shut down on, say, the full size frog, you can pick up either the junior or the junior popper and go to catching them just because you downsize something a little different. Hope that helps. And I'm just going to can you quickly the best frog pattern for now this time of year? Well, anything close to deep water, because those fish, there's tons of fish deep. They can move up and down really easy. So, if you don't have pads, but the thing is, if they're going to be shallow right now on a bright day with it being hot, they're going to want shade. And as long as there's food, there's plenty of bait fish. That's the deal. Is you have to have bait or perch up there for them to be eating. They're not just going to be up there to be up there. If there's no bait, they're going to be deep. They're going to be wherever the bait's at. So find the bait, you can catch them on a frog. I really like right now the hay grass, pepper grass. That's the sort of things, in those drains, kind of like I showed earlier. That's what you're going to want to target. The number of the luge rod I'm rigging for the popping frog. Let's see. So that rod is a LCL MPS. LCL MPS. It's a 7.4, and it's actually called the Magnum Pitching Stick. It's the custom Speed Stick Light, and it's actually got the wing grip handles on it. All right, guys, looks like that's kind of answered everything. So Charles asked, what's my preference as far as popping versus regular? If it's dead calm, I think that's the best time to throw it. If there's no ripple, then I think you need to. The whole deal is the fish knowing it's there. Now, in the early spring, I like throwing a popping frog just because I think those fish are roaming so much, looking to bed or their own beds, that you need to throw. I like to throw a popping frog in the pre-spawn. Once they get into actual spawn, I tend to actually go to a little more, because you're looking for those protected bays. You're going to be in those slick water situations. You're going to want to throw, just a plain non-popping frog. Summertime, if there's any kind of summertime, I'll go off wind. If there's wind and ripple, then I'm going to be throwing a popping frog. If there's not, if it's calm, I'm throwing over the mats, then I'm just going to have the plain, full frog. Oh, is that everything, guys? Well, hey, I really appreciate everyone attending. I hope this was helpful. Um, this webinar actually be recorded, so if you if you want to have it to be able to reference back, it'll be on navionics.com under webinars to have a recording on it. It'll also be on Navionics YouTube channel, which is where there's a ton of webinars. So that, that's a good place to check out. Oh, I'm sorry, Brad. So I threw the small one on. It's the same reel as the other ones, but it's the rod is the Custom Speed Stick Light, the LCL MVR. It's the Magnum Bass Rod. And the reel is also the Tournament Pro G 8-3-1. Again, guys, thanks a lot. If you ever have any ideas of webinar topics you'd like to see, feel free to hit me up. I'm on Facebook, just Corey Stanley, Corey. My email is cstanley@navionics.com, which I think all of you have from attending this, or they'll be sending you a thank you with my email on it. Don't be shy. Be more than happy to help anyone, whether it be a fishing question, a boating, or a mapping type deal with Navionics. Feel free to reach out. Again, guys, thanks a lot for attending, and we'll see you next time.